Hey, how's it going? So after I posted a cover of this song on YouTube, someone asked me if I would make a tutorial of it, and I figured that since I tabbed it out 3 years ago, something like that, that it makes sense to make a video tutorial because some people learn easier through video. Tab isn't always the best medium for teaching someone to play a song. I'm going to break this up into 3 sections so that it will be easier to learn. And each section is going to have parts that are repeated or that are slightly changed or varied as they're repeated. But yeah, I figured that would be the easiest way, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and play through section 1, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to actually play it. So here's section 1. Okay, it starts on the 3rd fret of the A string and the 5th fret of the B string, and the pattern that you play is like this. And then on that last note, on the A string, you slide up to the same shape, but on the 5th fret of the A string and the 7th fret of the B string. So like, and then you play both together. And then you move up to the 7th fret of the A string and the 8th fret of the B string. And the next part is, so you play each one twice, alternating between them. And then you slide up to the 10th fret of the B string, and then with this finger you play the 7th fret of the E string twice. But on the second time, you hammer on and pull off to the 10th fret of the E string. So altogether that is. That's part 1. Part 2 kind of starts out the same, but then it changes up near the end, so I'll play through that. So instead of going up here to the 7th fret, you go down to the 2nd fret of the A string and the 3rd fret of the B string. The pattern is pretty much exactly the same, so it's exactly the same, but you move down here instead. And even the next part, it's the same, but you slide up to the 5th fret of the B string, and then, yeah. And then you play the 3rd fret of the E string twice, but on the second time you hammer onto the 5th fret and pull off to the 3rd fret. So it's pretty much the same as before, just with different notes. That's part 2. Part 3 is just a repetition of part 1, but with a slight variation on this chord. So I'll play through it real quick. So when you play this chord, you hold out a little bit longer and you slide up and hold on this chord here. That's pretty much part 3. Part 4 is almost the same as part 2, but instead of going down here, you go up to a harmonic on the 12th fret of the G, B, and E strings. So that is all of section 1. I'll play through it one more time, just so you can hear it all in context. Okay, and that brings us into section 2. I'm going to play through that real quick and then I'll come back to talk about how to play it. Okay, this section is broken up into 4 parts, and it changes up a bit more than the first section, but it's really not much harder. So you want to start on the 3rd fret of the E string, and you play this by wrapping your thumb around the fretboard. So your thumb on the 3rd fret of the E string, and then with your middle finger you play the 3rd fret of the high E string. And this part pretty much just has an alternating pattern back and forth between your thumb and index finger on your picking hand. So just like... So, yeah. I'm going to go through this. 3rd fret of on the low E string and 3rd fret on the high E string. And this is the pattern. So you play one note on the 3rd fret of the high E string, and then you move down to the 2nd fret of the high E string. You play that one twice, but on the second time you play it, you do a hammer-on up to the 3rd fret of the high E and pull back off to the 2nd fret of the high E. You play the low E string. There you're playing the 5th fret of the high E string, and then going back down to the 2nd fret of the high E string. And that's part 1. Part 2, you start with open E strings. And this is the part. So you just sit there on the E strings for a little bit. And then you play the 7th fret of the high E string. Then you slide up to the 12th fret. You play that one twice. And then you move down to the 10th fret of the high E string. And then you move down to the 8th fret of the high E string. Then you play the 8th fret one more time and hammer onto the 10th fret. And slide down. That's the second part. The third part is pretty much the same as the first part, but instead of playing the 3rd fret on the low E string, you play the open A string. So that last note, instead of going back down to the 2nd fret of the E string, you play the open E string. Okay, so I will play through the 4th part and then I'll come back and talk about how to play it. So you play 4 notes alternating here between the 3rd fret of the A string and the 5th fret of the E string. So like, and then you do the same thing on the 5th fret of the A string and the 7th fret of the E string. So, and then you play the note on the A string one more time. And then you play the note on the E string again and slide up to the 7th fret of the A string and the 8th fret of the E string. So, the same pattern as before, but on this chord. Then you go up to the 9th fret of the A string and the 12th fret of the E string. That's part 4. You play this section twice, but with a variation on part 2. I'm going to show you that variation right now, but I'm going to play through part 1 first. pretty much what you're doing is you play the open E notes the same as you would before, but instead of playing the 7th fret of the E string and sliding up to the 12th fret, you play harmonics on the 7th fret of the E string, 7th fret of the B string, and then 12th fret of the B string. And then you play the open E string and then the 12th fret of the high E string. And whereas before you would have went, here you play, and that is 12th fret twice, then you move up to the 14th fret, then you move up to the 15th fret, and then back down to the 14th fret. And then the rest of the section is the same. You just repeat parts 3 and 4 the same way you did before. You repeat section 1 again after this, so just the first part, like. Yeah, that entire section is just repeated again the same way that it was before. Moving into section 3, you start on the beginning of section 2. So you play through the entire first part of it, like. All of that is the same, but what you change is, instead of going like you would have originally, you do the part from the variation where you go up to the 15th fret, so. And then you play through parts 3 and 4 the same way that you did before, like. The next part of section 3 is pretty much repeating section 1 again, but with some open G string notes in there. You pretty much just add them in place of some of the notes on the B string. But then on part 3 of this, whereas before it would have just been repeating part 1 again, instead you play this. So you're moving up to the 9th fret of the A string and the 10th fret of the B string. So. And you end by repeating part 2 rather than going up to the harmonics. So that last section is just. And that's it. I hope you learned something from this tutorial. If you're someone who learns from tab easier than video, I have a tab for this. I'll put a link to it in the description. So, yeah, go check that out if you want. If not, thanks for watching.